Recording in progress.
Terms of the resolving of queries, there are some provinces like your Eastern Cape where there's the 0 queries resolved. Chair, can you just be provided as to what are the reasons for such, and also what then happens to the complainant when queries are not resolved? Is the complainant informed that we're still working on your query, or what is the process, Chairperson? Chairperson, I think lastly coming to Brand South Africa. I would like to know that has the brand South Africa aligned its marketing strategy or programs with what is contained in the National Special Development Framework for the country in order to introduce all infrastructure investments and development to the domestic and international investors. Thank you, Chairperson.
Honorable Kibi.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, I ask your permission for not switching on my video due to network problems. Honorable Chair, honorable members, Deputy Minister and colleagues, let me also welcome the presentations, all 3 of them, and appreciate them as well. Honorable Chair, I'm fairly covered by Honorable Maneli and Honorable Ntuli on the questions that I wanted to ask. But I really appreciated the presentations done today by the department. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Honorable Bele.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning to everyone on the platform or watching online from home. I'll also echo the sentiments of my colleagues in saying thank you for the presentations. Certainly informative and good food for thoughts and reflection. I think I have about 2 questions on each of the presentations. So firstly, on the Presidential Hotline, the first question is around what they call data analytics, which is that in terms of observed general and repeated trends and patterns in the intake or receipts of the hotline, can you outline to us, firstly, which hours of the day, which days of the week, which weeks of the month, and then which months of the year tend to have increased volume or a spike in complaints or queries received from the public? And what insights or issues has that highlighted as being sort of systemic or sort of repeated general issues? Because I think that kind of understanding can go a long way in feeding into the planning and review processes of departments or of governments in other spheres. You were saying that you would like for the hotline to start having value add as an early warning system or highlighting sort of bigger bird's eye issues that would be useful to be understood. So I'm curious to know if those kind of spikes or volume increases around certain hours, days, weeks, and months of the year are giving a perspective in that regard. And then Okwesibili is in terms of the hotline capacity or team getting information regarding the progress or the resolution on cases that are submitted to them. Do you rely solely on feedback from PLOs in departments and provinces? So, for example, that figure that was quoted of how the Northern Cape had resolved all 9 of the cases that were referred to them, is that information obtained solely from the PLOs, or is that done directly by a relevant response team with the complainants themselves on a periodic basis, maybe quarterly or whatever the case might be, or is it both? Because I want to check if there isn't any risk factor of having inaccurate information about whether queries or complaints are being processed and moving forward or resolved, or do you get that information firsthand from the horse's mouth? Moving on to the presentation on performance agreements. I'm largely covered by the question of comment asking about whether incentives are affected. I'm coming at it from a different angle, which is to ask whether the late submissions by DGs or HODs, does that contribute in any way to performance assessments whenever those performance reviews happen? So it's about whether these kind of missteps or non-compliance is integrated and mainstreamed in the process of performance assessments, even outside of how it affects salary and bonuses and so on, but as a core performance assessment scoring, does that reflect as a factor if there has been non-compliance? I think that's just the one on that. And then finally, on the Brand SA presentation, obviously the objective of any such investment attraction efforts is, on the one hand, to secure investor confidence, and then on the other hand, to allay any potential investor fears and concerns and anxieties. So I'm curious to know, and this might be a slightly unfair question because Brand SA is not involved in any executive or sort of policy pronouncements, but you obviously have to convey and respond to questions from potential investors. So what does Brand SA say in response when engaging with potential investors if those investors raise questions or concerns about all the challenges, crime, social unrest, and especially given the way that the July riots last year puts this country on the global spotlights, but for the wrong reason, or if they also raise labor costs or disputes. I'm thinking about the kind of coverage that might have come out of the Clover protests in the last 6 months or so. Load shedding, big and ongoing concern, or just the decay of infrastructure that we've been having. What is the response feedback or the response arguments that Brand SA would give to a potential investor if they raise those questions or those concerns in those efforts to secure their confidence and potentially bringing resources to the country? And then my second question, Chair, with Brand SA is whether and how Brand SA aligns their marketing strategy or their programs with other investments, tourism, attraction entities or efforts, in particular, either by other departments in national or in provinces. I'm aware, for example, just because it's where I live, I'm aware that there's Westgrow in the Western Cape does, in the main, the same kind of work around investments attraction. So how do you align? Are you aligned and talking to your sort of kin, should I say, in those kind of efforts for sourcing, attracting, and securing investments for the country? Thank you, Chairperson. That's all from me.
Honorable Mkweba.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I close my video because of the network problem in the village?
You can, Honorable Gweba.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, DM, the department, the Brand SA, and led by the Chair and also honorable members. Let me then, Chair, welcome the input by the TM and also the presentation from the department and the Brand SA. Chair, I've got a few questions. I know that honorable members have asked a lot of questions, but however, it's important that, Chair, in this committee, it must be noted that the Presidential Hotline is a platform established to assist with service delivery matters. And therefore, Chair, it should improve the quality of service delivery throughout public service. And Chair, while we are facing a challenge of poor service delivery, the Presidential Hotline should be used as an indicator of proactively doing troubleshooting service delivery hotspots. And the Presidential Hotline also, Chair, it must be able to indicate what has been improved since its inception and whether the quality of service has improved. And as such, Chair, I've then picked up in the presentation of the issue about the participatory democracy. And Chair, I would wish to understand to the department, how has the Presidential Hotline deepened participatory democracy? Why I'm asking that question, Chair, is because in the committee then was then provided. In fact, I wish that the committee be provided with figures or timelines to indicate the vast improvements since the inception of the Presidential Hotline in terms of dealing with issues of service delivery on the ground. And secondly, Chair, one will wish to understand how does the Presidential Hotline use technology and social media to improve interaction with members of the public, and what will be the responses thereof. And lastly, Chair, on the Presidential Hotline, I wish to understand if the department and also the presidents has considered expanding the capacity of the hotline to improve its capability so that members of the public don't lose confidence in resolving their issues. I know that across the country, a lot of protests that speaks to service delivery issues. And Chair, I know that in the second report presentation on the status report on the filling of DGs and HODs, honorable members have asked a lot of questions, but I know that, in fact, I wish to understand, because the PDMS system, its responsibilities, it's supposed to evaluate and assess performance of HODs, obvious with key performance indicators. My question to that presentation is that how are they faring in their responsibilities and duties, which is the HODs and the DGs? And is there any improvements? Because the presentation does not necessarily indicate the performance of these HODs and DGs, especially of the previous financial year. So I want to understand, how are they then faring in their responsibilities and duties? And lastly, Chair, on the Brand SA, I know that the presentation mentioned, in fact, of poor governance that has facilitated ineffective policing of criminals and handling of COVID-19 pandemic. Can the Brand SA Chair explain further, elaborate the impact of crime towards attracting investors in our country,
and also explain the attitude of the attitude of the investors in terms of the high crime rate. And lastly, Chair, the Dubai program can then the brand SA explain Atlantica share with the committee the lesson learned at the Dubai program, and also how better position the South Africa. And also, I wish to understand their message to the Davos World Economic Forum. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Rosina is struggling, and she has therefore sent her question to me to raise it on her behalf. I'm now going to raise that question from the honorable member. Honorable Rosina has asked, there are so many hotlines which has caused duplication. How is the interface between the government's hotlines, and how efficient are these call centers in addressing the complaints? What is the turnaround time that compels government to respond? Is there any policy to that effect? Questions from Honorable Rosina Koman. Thank you. The department can respond.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if the DM would want to start.
Let me check first. Did you get the question I raised on behalf of Honorable Rosina Koman?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We'll go quickly through the questions. I will pick some of the questions, and Mr. Serfontaine and others will also pick up on some of the questions. Pointers when it comes to the performance management system. Let me start with the Presidential Hotline. As things stand currently, DPME has a performance indicator that says that we want to resolve at least 60% of the cases each year. Now, that indicator is only applying to the DPME. It does not apply to the actual people who are supposed to resolve the issues. Now, what we want to do is to take this thing up with all the affected parties and say that HODs across the board must have similar indicators. Because if you say to the DG of DPME, you are going to ensure that there is resolution of all the complaints or comments or suggestions that come through the Presidential Hotline, but you don't do the same with the people who are supposed to resolve those questions, then there's an anomaly in the system. So that's one thing that we are going to introduce as we reform the system of performance management in government. The other issues related to performance in government is the quality assurance, wherein you don't want a situation whereby when you weight indicators, you leave it to HODs to do so. Because some people can weigh very important performance areas low and some high. That results in a situation whereby a DG who will score higher and the one who's going to score lower may not necessarily mean that in terms of the weighting of the outcomes, the one who's getting a higher score has indeed done more than the other. So that quality assurance is very important for DPSA and DPME to ensure that the scoring is not left to the devices of those who are going to be assessed, because people can always vary the score so that they are favored by the outcome. So that's one issue that we're going to do. The other issue is the linkage between the performance agreements of ministers and DGs. So that is going to be done. It's currently not the case to a large extent, but we are working on that to ensure that there is alignment between the two. The other issue with regard to the performance of HODs that we are looking at is that in some cases you find that the performance of an HOD is the same as that of the department. So there's always no clarity on the specific activities that the HOD undertakes. So what the department will do will just take the entire APP of the department and make that the performance agreement of an HOD. And that becomes a challenge when we do assessment. So these are some of the issues that we have picked up. Now, very quickly on the issues raised by honorable members. Honorable Tuli, we agree with you that we want the presidential hotline to be utilized by South Africans, not just for complaints, but also for other things like suggestions on what can be done in a number of areas where government is involved. And as indicated in the presentation, we got a report from the CSR about 2 or so years ago, but we could not implement the reforms because of the budget issues. Now I can indicate that National Treasury has given us 45 million over a 3-year period, which means that we have 15 million for this year, next year, and that other year over the MTF. So now that we have a budget, we can do all these innovations that honorable members have been recommending, and that, as indicated in the presentation, is our biggest focus this year, to use the money that has been allocated to us to innovate and improve the performance of the presidential hotline. I will leave the issue raised by Honorable Maglua with respect to the specific case of his own complaint, but then say that on the relationship with the mobile companies, that recommendation is noted. We can take it with the department that deals with the mobile companies, that is the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, and see if they can help us for certain classes of South Africans to be allowed to use the presidential hotline without pay. So I'll take that as one of the suggestions that we look at. Indeed, Honorable Maglua, on the question of infrastructure vandalism in South Africa, this is a big issue of concern to us. And in our last submission to Cabinet on the performance of government, we recommended that something has to be done very drastically. Particularly, we focus on the issue of the scrap metals, whether there can be a moratorium introduced. But then your comment is on point that we can use the presidential hotline for real-time information to be sent to us by South Africans. So as part of this digitization of the hotline, we'll then be able to deal with such issues. To an extent, we do receive such complaints or warnings from members of the public, but these are, they don't always come real time. So I think with the improvement of the system, that is what we'll have to do. Then Honorable Gondwe, Mr. Serponte will deal with the situation before the introduction of the current PMDS. Now, those who have not submitted, we are escalating this issue to the minister in the presidency to write to the ministers, because one of the requirements in the performance of the ministers themselves is that they have a responsibility to ensure that their DGs have performance agreements. So again, talking about consequence management will not only apply to DGs, but also to ministers, because there are instances where DGs tell us that they have not completed their performance management agreements because their principals have not consented, they have not signed. Some, as indicated in the presentation, do upload even when the ministers have not signed. So given that dimension, we will have to include this in the letter that the minister will be writing to the other ministers. But at the level of the president, We have just completed the assessment of the ministers, and we looked also into this issue. So the president will be made aware when we present the assessment that has been done for ministers, that there have also been challenges in a number of cases where performance agreements were not signed. And when we check, we find that the DGs did everything that they were supposed to do, but the political principals did not sign. So we understand that the president, in the ultimate analysis, will be the one who's responsible for that anomaly. But for the purposes of the minister, just to alert people that the performance agreements have not been submitted by some of the HODs. The Minister of Public Service and Administration is responsible for policy. So when the DGs seek a condonation, that is done through the MPSA, and we try to coordinate with DPSA to ensure that there is no gap in the system. But if issues that arise indicate that politicians have a role to do, we have to escalate that to the relevant authorities. So we will provide more details on this particular issue, but we are alerting both the president, the minister in the presidency, and the minister of the DPSA to say that, because at the end, every DG must have a performance agreement. We cannot say that because we are going to dog a salary progression, therefore a DG can opt out of the performance management system. So honorable members when we agree with you that if we allow that loophole, we can end up with a situation whereby signing a performance agreement is voluntary. So I can decide that, no, this year I don't need it, even if I don't get a pay progression. That cannot be the case. So we agree with yourselves that we need this serious intervention, particularly at the level of the head of state, where we've escalated everything related to performance management. Then on the issue of results-driven system, we are discussing with DPSA that we need to improve the system, because there are instances where you find that people are only talking about processes and not the end game. So we want to see the end results. Of course, we are aware that before you can get an end result, you need some processes to be undertaken. You cannot have results without processes. But that balance is very important so that we can get a result. We have started to do this, and when we present on our assessment chair of the APPs, we have done an analysis of all APPs of all government departments, and we can come to the committee to first show the work that we've done, because that's where it starts, that the APPs themselves must move towards outcomes. And once you have done that at the level of APPs, then you will be able to do same on the performance management side. So I wish to request, Chair, that we be allowed to come and provide the committee with our own analysis of what it is that government departments have planned to do, all of them, and what is that we see in terms of the commitments that are coming up. Quickly on Honorable Maneli, we will provide information on the previous financial year on assessment. But there is one member of this committee who sent us a question, a parliamentary question. The question was, is there a relationship between the performance of DGs and the performance of departments? We have not done that detailed assessment, but triggered by that question, we are going to look at this and maybe get some entity like CSIR, Human Science Research Council, to then do a correlation and analysis of whether the performance of DGs in particular reflect the performance of departments. So I will say, Chair, that we have not done that in a detail that may be needed at the level of the committee, but that's something that we are going to do. And then with the issue of the presidential hotline, Honorable Maneli saying that, yes, we are receiving complaints, but we need much more than complaints, and we need to allow South Africans to use the hotline for everything that needs to be done. So when we move to the stage of analytics, what we envisage is that will also reduce the cost of human resources that we need for the presidential hotline, because through the analytics layer, when a complaint is lodged, it can come to us and even go straight to the relevant department on the other end. So we can have a line of sight to see that this complaint that has been sent to us, because the drop-down menu will then allow users to indicate whether it's Limpopo or Northern Cape or a particular municipality or department. And that's what we're going to do, so that on our side, we don't spend a lot of time doing manual work, but we spend most of our time focusing on performance, on chasing on performance, than on sorting who must receive what complaint, because that is what takes a lot of our time, as he indicated. And very limited time then remains for us to deal with the content issue. So we agree with honorable members. I've indicated that DGs must take responsibility, so that it's not only the DG of DPME who takes responsibility for the resolution of the complaints that come from the members. So Honorable Mbele has indicated we have not activated the analytics layer, but that is what we are going to do with the money that we have from the NT, so that we can work more efficiently once we have this system. And then Mr. Sepodin will deal with the kind of issues that we receive on a daily basis, or what are the peak days or hours within which we get most of the complaints. But in the presentation, we indicated the type of issues that are raised by South Africans whenever they engage with us. Honorable Mugweba, yes, is going to be an indicator for troubleshooting for us as a government, and we accept that injunction. And also we will indicate the improvements that we have seen, particularly with the introduction of Kauleza, although it has not been launched on a large scale. We will then come back to the committee to indicate the improvements year in, year out, in terms of what we have seen. First, in terms of what comes into the system, but also in terms of the rate of resolution of the challenges. So we are going to show that. Lastly, on my side, from Honorable Rosina, based on the question that was presented by the chairperson, I need to say that there are indeed many hotlines that exist in government, and these hotlines are not interoperable for a range of reasons, including perhaps that everyone has been doing what they're supposed to do, particularly in the area of local government, where sometimes they are autonomous in the work that they do from the public service. So I think there is something interesting to take from that equation, whether when we receive complaints, comments, and questions, and we have the analytics layer, whether when we relate to the relevant entities on the other side, those will go to the hotlines that exist, or will go to the DGO. I guess that in areas where there are hotlines that exist, we can sign service level agreements to maybe route the questions through that platform. So, Chair, I've attempted to deal with quite a number of issues, but I can tell you that my own reading of what came up here is some guidance from members of the committee on how this reform that we're talking about on the PMDS and the presidential hotline must not only just be about technology. So my take home, the underlying message that I take from you is that we must not just be obsessed by technology, but we must resolve very practical issues that affect South Africans. So I've taken copious notes on all the issues that are raised, and on the areas that we said we'll come back to you. Chair, if you grant us that permission, we'll do that. Let me ask Mr. Serfontaine to quickly go on through some specific questions and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, honorable members and honorable chair. Yeah, so I'll quickly try and capture some of this stuff. And Honorable Ntuli, I think we do take your point where, let's say, if you were talking about the water trucks dumping the water. So yes, I think it's not probably correct. If I now have to register my complaint against the municipality at the municipal hotline. So we do would want to cater for that. I can take that up to a other level, a higher level, and that going forward. So I think a lot of members also raised the issue about social media and how we utilize social media. And I think we're upfront to say we haven't utilized social media really in this process within the hotline. So that's definitely part of our plans, is saying, how do we start sort of also identifying service delivery issues and all of those through the hotline, so through the social media. So we definitely will start incorporating social media analysis as part of that. I think also Honorable Thuli sort of talked about how would rural people or people living in rural areas access Gauleza. And I think that's why we're saying we should give multiple avenues to people. So we are also considering the PITS terminals. If we cannot use, like you were explaining, the ATMs, if we can't put some of those terminals out in public service venues for them to then collect, also be able to communicate to us as well going forward. So I think DG also talked about the consequences of the PMDS and is the not having a notch increase, is that sufficient, and those things. So I think we do acknowledge and hear from the committee that we should be much stronger on consequences, and we'll take that further with our policy owners, DPSA, going forward. Honourable Maklua, I'll definitely follow up on those cases that you mentioned. Just to mention that the hotline, when it comes to corruption, let's say, or suggestions or claims of corruptions coming through, we then refer those calls to the Public Service Commission, who's got the anti-corruption hotline, because we don't have the capabilities to do those corruption allegations, investigations, and those type of things. But I'll definitely follow up. It might be also one of those emails, and I think if you remember, we talked about the challenges we currently have in integrating the email system with the hotline system going forward. So, and we also agree that the hotline system is not swamped. We're not getting the right, or we're not getting value for money out of that system, and we hope that all these initiatives will work towards that. I think DG talked about the responsiveness from other departments and that. And then Honourable Dr. Gondwe, yes, prior to 2018, there was a system on also performance agreements and evaluations of their performance. That system was then facilitated via the Public Service Commission, and it was also still very, let's call it, compliance output-based sort of system. So So there was agreements and assessments against those agreements. I think prior to 2018, for the few years leading up, let's say, I think from about 2015 onwards, those assessments were completed between the minister and the DG. So I think the new system brought in this evaluation panel and some type of moderation through it. And also try to bring in some organizational performance, where we're bringing in Auditor General outcomes as well as your APP outcomes in that. So there was a system in place prior to 2018. And apologies for the mistake or the error in the submission rates. Sometimes it's about the rounding effect. When we round up the numbers in the individual tables, then when we do the summarized one, it doesn't carry through. I think the non-compliance culture, we would also acknowledge and see how we take that forward. And then, so then I think Honorable Maneli also raised issues around the assessment for the previous year, and I think some other members also raised it. So the process is just, so if we look at the previous year's 21-22 financial year, what will happen now is there'll be assessment done between the minister and the DG, the relevant minister and the DG, and those assessments will then be tabled with DPME by end of December, by December of this year. Why it's so late is because we have to wait for the annual reports and the Auditor General reports to come out. And then those assessments will then be done. And then we go into this evaluation, moderation process. And I think it's in finalizing those assessments, that's when we can then start doing the correlations analysis between the performance of DGs and others, as our DG has been talking about in relation to the performance of the department. But just to mention, 20% of the assessment value comes out of the achievement of APP targets. So we try to incorporate some type of departmental performance in the system, but I think it's an area that we still have to improve much going forward. I think also, I mean, some of the members talked about whether they should still keep positions, but I think DG also talked about, we also have to look at where the non-compliance is due to the DG or the minister or other parties, let's call it that, and then say, how do we treat that? But I do think we do get the message that compliance, we should come up with much better consequence management and to improve compliance going forward. So I think also some of the members talked about how did we go about improving participatory governance and all of that. But I think we are saying, as outlined, we probably are not achieving those targets, those objectives that were set for the hotline, and therefore we would say going forward we're going to try and strengthen that. So I think. If the committee allows us, we'll come at a later stage to then say how did the new system now enhance this participation and participatory governance and those going forward. And then Honourable Mbele, I don't have those trends at hand, but we will definitely commit to give the committee the trends on saying at what times are we getting calls, what days, what months, is there a change in the trends of calls coming through over different times, and what's the nature of those calls. So we'll definitely do that. Just to say on verifying whether, so yes, the status, if we saying a case has been resolved, we then rely on the PLOs to then capture that for us into the system. But I did also mention we do a sampling on citizens, on people that logged their cases, to then also ask them about satisfaction in dealing with their case, as well as in that way we also verify whether that is. But we would also say we probably need a bit more in validation and verification of those things. When we do the PMDS, when we do the assessment, we would indicate to the panel whether a DG did actually comply to the submission rates and stuff of performance agreements and so forth. But there is no scoring. It doesn't influence the scoring. And it's something that we definitely will also take forward. Yeah, I do also, Honorable Ngueba, on identifying hotspots, it's definitely something we would aim to address in this new system. I think it's a very, very good suggestion and something we would definitely look forward to that. And I think also on we probably we have another unit which is called the Frontline Service Delivery Monitoring Unit, which goes out and monitors frontline services. So we're also looking at more doing some service, let's say, also satisfaction ratings on service delivery. So the citizen might not register a complaint around the service, but we also have to start sort of getting a sense of how services are delivered. So I know some of the banks, you have a little keypad where you just type in a quick rating of services, and then we can also look at service delivery across different institutions, across regions, districts, and all of those things going forward. And then, I think DG also addressed Honorable Kumani's question. So, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable members, I hope we've addressed some of your questions. Thanks.
Those were the responses from the department.
Let me thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister, and your staff, and all honorable members for attending this portfolio committee today. And therefore, the meeting has now come to an end, and it therefore stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, it's Honorable Mbele here. We didn't hear from Brand SA. Would they responses? Sorry.
Okay, Honorable Mbele. Brand SA, can you come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. Please allow me to switch off my camera because I'm in a very bad connection point. May I?
Yeah, you can.
Thank you. Honorable members, thank you very much for your questions. And let me say upfront, I need to apologize upfront because I'm not having any intention to offend members when I answer questions. So if I come across like that, please forgive me. It's not my intention. Maybe it's my tone when I speak. Let me start with Honorable Maneli. Honorable Maneli, we do not implement projects as our budget. It's mostly about marketing the country. So our budget, it's only 210 million. So government implements, we market what government does. So we are also marketing the infrastructure projects that government is involved in as part of the entire strategy to the positive narrative we have for South Africa. And as for Honorable Mbele, thank you very much for asking me the most difficult question that actually underpins the work that we do, where we meet people who ask very difficult questions about South Africa. If Honorable Mbele remembers last year, we had to deal with the issue specifically of the unrest. And part of what we said is that South Africa's got 9 provinces. And the unrest happened only in 2 provinces. Yes, these are the key economic provinces, but it only happened in 2 major cities. So if you looked at the economic performance of the country in that fiscal year, it actually improved. Hence, the revenue collection improved. Of course, no country wants to deal with unrest. No country wants to deal with crime. Hence, when we speak to the main stakeholder, which is government, you might have seen our articles that we wrote in the recent past, where we pleaded with the state to be consistent in the messaging and to be able to deal with crime. We were upfront as Brand South Africa to specifically request the judiciary to speed up cases of corruption that has been put before it. So we are not shying away from talking to difficult issues that we experience during our work, because we've got a research unit that do a perception survey, and it will table as is what is the perception out there, both internationally, regionally, and locally. So we do address those issues as they come. And on load shedding, we were able to call upon the players to understand the importance of making sure that we do have a stable energy framework in the country, and the mining Indaba has spoken to that, and we were able to highlight the issues that the mining Indaba resolved on, especially those about just transition. On the decaying infrastructure, it's an issue that we always speak to the infrastructure injection money that the president has injected in this fiscal year, because there is hope with the amount of money, billions of rands that has been allocated on infrastructure spend, which the president announced during the State of the Nation address. So we lift up those messages and tell them that this is what government said it will do. I thank you for your question. In terms of the marketing strategy, I appreciate this question. And the reason being, yes, we do want to partner with entities and agencies that deals with, and that's why I'm going to ask Stembile Ndombela to expand, and she will demonstrate how we've worked, for instance, with the KwaZulu-Natal government and the Department of Tourism in dealing with tourist attraction. So she will demonstrate that in a quick way. Honorable Mgoeba, thank you very much for your questions. The first one, I want to speak to what you spoke about, the last one. We just came back from Davos. Minister Kubai did a splendid job. We supported her from day one until the last day in terms of media programs, in terms of packaging the messages, and physically having our most senior officials led by the CEO and the CMO and all other senior leaders to ensure that at Davos, we do not miss on the messages that government is carrying in terms of investment attraction. And again, Stembile will demonstrate what we were able to achieve. We have not yet met to assess the impact, but there are a lot of AVs we can forward. We can, there's always no time, because we're a show and tell type of an organization. We wish to show you the work that we do, but we never get adequate time to demonstrate the work that we do too. So that's part of the things that we have dealt with. And we're so happy. We were celebrating actually when we came back from Davos at the work that the minister was able to do and what we were able to do to assist government in achieving that. In terms of the Dubai program and the lesson learned, I wish we could have seen the Emirates stall that I think has cost billions of rands. If we had such money, we would have done something like that. We can't even compare to what they did. But in terms of the messages, let me tell you a secret. We were able to put a pavilion that made the Sheikh even to come. On the day that the president came, before the president could go into our pavilion, the ruler of Dubai was so interested that he went there in first. So that's the impact we had in terms of that little stall we had, but its powerfulness was able to be felt on the ground. Chair, please allow me to get the team to just make final inputs. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. Is the strategy aligned to the 6th administration? Yes, it is. What is the process involved in responding to challenges as Chair has mentioned? The process usually involves us engaging with GCIS as they sit in all clusters and committees and are privy to messaging and interventions that are being implemented as proof points, which we then package in a manner that is consumable and is made relevant on the various media platforms as well as in the messages. But obviously, before we go into any global platform, there are two things we generally do. One is we do research on perceptions about South Africa. And two, we monitor and track what is being said about South Africa. So we don't go there cold and unaware of what is being said, so that we are prepared in order for us to be able to provide decent and relevant answers. We also engage the various departments for messaging and tangible proof points prior to attending some of these global platforms. For example, at WEF, the issue of energy came up, which turns out is actually a global issue. All countries are battling with energy supply. And we spoke to structural reforms being implemented for the supply of energy. Of course, there are areas of improvement, especially on questions of GBV and crime, where sometimes we don't necessarily have access to information of the actual interventions being implemented. Do we align with national departments and provincial agencies? Of course we do. The Sweden engagement I showcased today in my presentation was in collaboration with Westgro. Our own Nation Brand Forum, we invited various partners from government, business, and civil society so that we have alignment. What did we do in Davos? We developed key messages that were structured around what is in the environment, and we shared this messaging together with the minister and the private sector who were attending and were positioned to speak at prime spots in the WEF annual meetings. And one of those messages was that public-private partnerships have shown to be successful in South Africa. And we made the example of the manufacture of vaccines that have now extended for the benefit of the continent. And again, we also spoke to structural reforms that are being implemented for the supply of energy. Dubai was a 6-month program, and every month was themed. So what we did there was not only support with the look and feel of the pavilion and the branding and the visibility of the country, we also compiled a list of key milestones throughout the 6 months, which we then used as our messaging for our media program to say, to what end was South Africa in Dubai? So, for example, there was a showcase of South African icons where Esther Mahlangu was the only artist allowed to design Air Jordans in the world, which is a big deal about flying the flag of South Africa. What else did we do? We were able to showcase that African sales exceeded 300 million. SA product sales for Hyperama showed a 30% growth during that period we were there. And there's now a greater demand for products. 600 jobs, for example, were created in the steel coils industry. Over 100 SMMEs were showcased. So that's what we do as marketers, is we pull the information, we package it, we break it down into bite sizes, and we place it in the relevant platform so that it shows the proof points of what is being achieved at any point, particularly at these global platforms. I thank you, Chair.
Through you, Chair, just a last one on my side is Tembile. Just to put the honorable members at ease that one of our outcomes in the APP speaks to us as Brand South Africa, aligning stakeholders to the nation brand experience and execution. And therefore, what we often do right at the beginning stages as we embark on developing an APP, we then engage multiple stakeholders that are within the investment arena to just align in terms of upcoming key projects, particularly those that are of a global, nature, because then that is where we intend to align, number one, on messaging as well as on execution. So if that is embedded in our strategy, definitely then implementation becomes easy, because then we then collaborate at a provincial level as well as at a national level with multiple stakeholders. So I thought that was one point that I needed to bring forward, so that honorable members could be at comfort that definitely we do align ourselves, because as we say, we may be the leaders that champion the narrative and the perceptions around South Africa, but we need other role players that play different positions to then make sure that the message is cohesive when we then implement our projects. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Here we are.
Thank you, honorable members. As I said, thank you to you, the DM Kikane and your staff, and honorable members of this committee. We will deal with the minutes in the forthcoming meeting next week. Bear with me on that one. Thank you very much for availing yourselves to this meeting. And now our meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Long live the Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
You
Thank you,
even
Chair.
sound better, Chair, in terms of
Long live.
you sound very better.
Long
Thank you,
live.